Hey guys, Dr. Alex the Punch Doctor here, and today I want to look at Big George Foreman's punch mechanics. Big George uses a mix of wild punches, arm punches, and crisp mechanics. George can create a lot of force and power even in his arm punches because he's so big. Remember that force equals mass times acceleration, and power equals mass times velocity. George can be effective with an arm punch where other fighters can't. He doesn't have to use the most precise mechanics to land with power, and this makes him a dangerous opponent. Another advantage he has is being very relaxed in the ring. A relaxed muscle can contract more than a tight muscle. If your muscle has 100% capacity to contract, and it's already 50-60% tight just from tension, it only has that other 40% in theory to contract. If it's 100% relaxed, it can contract 100%, creating a bigger, more forceful contraction. He's also a very intimidating guy, especially when he was young, making a lot of his opponents look nervous or stressed in the ring. Being stressed will reduce your power, tire you out faster, and cause you to be stiff and have less fluid movement, which will reduce reaction time. In this video, I'm going to summarize some of the principles I've talked about in previous videos, and then I'm going to show you some footage of Big George, including some big punches and knockouts. I'm also going to show you examples of some of his wild shots and swings. First, I'm going to summarize the keys to punching power. If you want a more in-depth look, watch my previous videos, including my videos on Alex Pereira, Naoya Inoue, and Artur Beterbiev. So the framework of a power punch includes 4 phases: load phase, explode phase, accelerate, and follow through. Load phase is a loading of elastic muscle energy into your muscles, which then you can explode from with a contraction of these stretched muscles. Accelerate phase is an acceleration through all your joints until reaching peak velocity at impact, and a follow-through is a weight transfer into and through your target. Now, the engine that powers the 4 phases is a combination of stretch shortening cycles. It's a series of stretch shortening cycles. The stretch shortening cycle is a phenomenon where you can get a more significant contraction from a quickly stretched muscle. Think dipping down quickly before you jump, or bouncing a weight in the weight room like a bench press with some rhythm to stretch a muscle quickly before you contract it. The stretch shortening cycles in the context of a punch happen in 4 main areas. In the hips, with a lowering of your center of gravity like in a jump, with a rapid hip contraction afterwards to power your hips into rotation. Between the hips and the torso, to stretch the cross-body kinetic chains. Between the torso and the arm, including the pec muscle that crosses the shoulder joint, and in the arm itself, after the arm has picked up momentum, to add an increased acceleration to the fist and increased velocity and impact. These areas utilize the cross-body kinetic chains. These are all important. However, the chief and primary stretch shortening cycle needs to occur between the hip and the torso to stretch the cross-body kinetic chains. You need to have the hips and torso be able to move independently to create stretch in the spiral line and the front functional line. The spiral line includes the internal oblique, external oblique, and serratus anterior, starting with the hip that's moving backwards, the internal oblique on that side, external oblique of the hip moving forward, and then serratus anterior that goes into the shoulder blade. And the front functional line, which starts in the leg of the posteriorly rotating hip, goes up through the abs to the pec, which crosses the shoulder joint going into the punching arm. You have 2 options for the main stretch shortening cycle. It can occur all at once with a rapid lowering of your center of gravity to stretch the cross-body chains, including the chains that cross the shoulder joint, or it can start with the hips themselves to stretch the cross-body chains, goes hip, torso, arm. Either way, the stretch contraction is the key to generating punching power. The traditional pivoting method of punch mechanics fails to utilize this principle. When you use the stretch shortening cycle, the movement that you're creating accelerates until it reaches a peak velocity at contact. The linear method is all at once. It's all or nothing, and it moves at the same speed, which is not how you generate power. Now, the contraction generally occurs in blocks. Hip, torso, arm, which accelerates until impact. This elastic loading of the tissues allows a faster, stronger contraction, a slingshot-like effect that accelerates every joint until impact, where you transfer your weight into and through your opponent. This might sound complicated. However, I have a very, very easy way for you to learn it. It's my program called the Power Punching Blueprint, which is an A to Z program that rebuilds and retrains your mechanics to use your kinetic chains, torque, and acceleration with the stretch shortening cycle to maximize your punching power. You don't need to know any of the technical information for the program to work for you. If you can throw a ball, you can punch with power, and I can teach you how. If you're interested, head over to howtopunchharder.com for more info. Let's get into the clips. The first fight I want to take a look at is George Foreman versus Joe Frazier 2. Now, this is an older fight when Foreman is younger, and it's pretty clear. And this is one of the best examples I have of showing Foreman's mechanics. In his later fights, he pulls his trunks up really high, and you can't really see his hips move relative to the rest of his body. And in the old fights I have of his, a lot of them are just poor quality, and I can't really visualize them well enough. They're not crisp enough for me to show you exactly what's going on. The first thing I want to show you is this lead right from George, and you're going to see all the stuff that I talk about, including leading with the hips, chain reaction, chain of events, which culminates in an impact. So let's watch it in slow-mo, and then we'll pull it back here and watch it again. So I want to show you that he lowers his center of gravity. So remember the 4 phases: load, explode, accelerate, follow through. So the first thing he does is lower his center of gravity. What that does, it stretches the muscles in his legs and his hips that he can then use to contract on and explode from, just like you might dip down before you jump. So he's lowering his center of gravity, and you see the hips rotate before anything else does. Look at his belt line, and you'll see his right hip elevate. Now that is specifically him pushing off with his leg, and it's creating torque. It's creating rotation in the hips, and rotation in the hips relative to his torso. His torso is not moving as much as his hips are. Now, eventually the torso will begin to move, but the hips come first. You'll see his hips come down, and then his hips start moving forward before his torso does. Look at his belt line. So his hips come down and start moving forward before the rest of his body. And what that does, it creates the stretch and then the contraction in the crossbody chains. Down and forward, and then everything follows. Impact, follow through. And we're going to see it again in even more emphatic fashion right here. And he follows it up with a left hook. Now let's look at that one. Same idea. Lowers his center of gravity, pushes off, and you can see his torso is not moving with the hip exactly. The hip is moving first. See that rotation? Now everything picks up and accelerates until impact. And he moves his arm through his opponent. Right there. His body is leaning forward, putting his entire body into it. Moves his weight through his opponent. And now his weight is on his left leg. And he gets his balance a bit and pushes off. See that rotation in the hip? More than his arm and his torso. Everything comes after that. Picks up the stretch contraction, powers the punch, impact, weight transfer, follow through. Let's watch it one more time. And you can see the chain of events. The weight comes down, the hips move first, and then everything accelerates after that. Impact, follow through. His weight comes down again on the left leg. He pushes his hip into rotation, creates stretch between his arm and his torso. Then everything picks up that contraction. Crossbody chains, including the arm lines, accelerates everything, impact, follow through. Let's look at the Foreman knockout of Michael Moore. And he lands 1-2 and then another 1-2 that puts Moore down. Now the first one is pretty big. It lands on Moore's forehead and stuns him quite well. And we're going to see the same type of mechanics that I talk about. For the first 1-2 and the second 1-2. Now for the first 1-2, let's take a look at this frame by frame. So you're going to see George right here, jab, nice jab, sets up the right hand, and look at his belt line, look at his hips. See how those hips come forward? Now look at his arm relative to his hips. His hips are coming forward and his arm is moving back. So what's that doing? That hips moving forward is stretching the crossbody kinetic chains. The arm moving back is adding even more stretch to the crossbody kinetic chains, specifically the front functional line and the arm lines which cross the shoulder. So there's all those lines are involved. Hips come forward, creates a stretch, everything picks up that contraction, everything moves forward until impact. And then we'll watch the second one. Jab, and look at the hips. There's a couple frames where the hips are coming forward, the arm is moving back, and then everything picks up the contraction. Look at his belt line, hips move forward, look at his arm. Same frames, arm is moving back. Creates a stretch, everything contracts here, and accelerates until impact. Now, if that was a little bit difficult to see, I have another view. Let's look at the overhead view. This is going to be even easier to see. Jab comes out. Now look at George's belt line and his foot. See that hip move forward? And then everything comes after that. And it's a big right hand. He throws it with so much force that he has to move his right leg in order to catch his weight transfer. Let's look at that one more time. George steps, so his weight's coming down. And look at his hip. The screen moves at the same time, so it might be hard to see, but it's the same idea you saw in the last view. Hips moving forward and arm is moving back. Stretching the chains, you don't need a whole lot. Just enough, something to contract off of. Big punch. And look at his follow through. After he makes contact, look at his weight continue through the punch. You can see his upper body back that punch up, continue moving forward. George is a big dude. He's even bigger now than he was before. That's a lot of weight going through Michael Moore. Big punch. Let's take a look at these famous clips of George hitting the heavy bag. Now you're going to notice the same thing that I just pointed out. Look at his hips relative to the rest of his body. See how they're moving forward relative to the rest of his body? They're moving forward before anything else moves. After they start moving, the torso starts moving, the arm is still lagging, and now the arm goes. So it's a chain of events. And it first starts with the hips to stretch the cross-body kinetic chains. And then it's stretching the kinetic chains that cross the shoulder joint. When he leads with his hips, it creates stretch in the chains between his hips and his torso. And then when he starts moving his torso and his arm is still lagging, it's creating stretch between his torso and his arm. Then they pick up the contraction. They all pick up the contraction, and it lands with a very nice impact. Now, George is a big guy. He's athletic. He's got good genetics, good joint integrity, which leads to balanced muscles and good resting muscle tension. His bones are big. I mean, they're just solid and large. He's a big man, and he's relaxed. So you add all these together, and you're going to get big punches just like you're seeing here. Remember what I said about a relaxed muscle. When a muscle is relaxed, it has more potential to contract than does a tight muscle. This one's a little bit harder to see because he's quicker here. However, you can still see the hips go first. Let's back it up. So his momentum is moving backwards, naturally stretching all those chains just from the momentum backwards. And they're reaching peak stretch right here. And then he turns his hips and everything follows. He's coiling up like a spring when he moves backwards. And you can try this at home. Just let your swing kind of to your right, just like George is doing, and try to feel the stretch between your hips and your torso and your arm. So as his momentum is coming backwards, those are all stretching as he's braking here. Right? He's slowing down, those are stretching, loading the elastic properties of the muscle. And then when he initiates the hip rotation, he's able to contract on that stretch and everything moves forward. And you can see it's still a chain reaction. Everything lags behind the hips. The motion begins with the hips. Here I want to show you a really wild shot against Jerry Cooney. It's almost comical how wild it is. You'll see George, it looks like he's just flailing like an untrained kid. But look, I mean, he drops his weight down, gets that pelvis moving forward, the arm lags behind, and then he lands with his fist. But the way he does it, it's wild. It's not precise. A lot of other guys wouldn't be able to get away with it, but because he's so big and there's so much mass in his arms, I'm sure that didn't feel good for Jerry to absorb, even though it hit him on the arms from what it looks like. If you want to see some more of George's wild shots, check out the Ali fight. He gets really wild in that one. George is just a big, tough, robust guy. And here you're going to see a wild shot from George get him counted by Jerry. You'll see this wide shot here, left hook, and George's right arm is down. Jerry blocks it and responds with his own left hook. Very good. If George wasn't so big and robust, Jerry was a decent boxer. He was good. Knocked out Ken Norton, George is just really big, really robust, and tough guy. Now here you're going to see another example of George's wild punches. Chopping right hand that misses. I'm not exactly sure what kind of punch this is. Just a swat, right? Like how effective is that? And this is actually looks like a big uppercut that lands. But not, kind of wild, using wild mechanics, not really using the most precision. I mean, he gets his hip behind it, but it's just sort of a swing of his arm. He also isn't using his entire body. He's using a stretch in the deltoid to really power his arm. You can see the stretch in his shoulder right there. However, him not using really perfect mechanics doesn't matter, like I mentioned, because his arm is so big, he lands with a ton of force. Big 1-2 coming up right here. Bit of awkward timing because he's already coming forward when his hip comes down and he pushes off, which I'll show you right here. So you can still get some torque. You can't see it because his trunks are so high. And he's already coming forward before his leg comes down. While he's coming forward while his center of gravity is coming down. But then just based on how the punch works out, you can tell that his whole body was behind it. So it's a big shot. And then another weird arm shot right here. And another swinging wild shot. And then it's a jab that finishes Jerry for the first knockdown. Let's take a look at the walking uppercut now. The punch that always makes me crack up. It's like the most casual walk in the park. And a violent uppercut. And then another big right hand that ends the fight, of course. Let's take a little bit closer look at this, and you're going to see all the principles I talk about at play here. Big hip torque, a turning of the entire body, and all the cross-body chain involvement. And you can't see it from this angle. I'll show you another angle in a moment. However, when he steps, his arm's coming back, and he starts rotating his hips and his entire body away from the arm, which increases the stretch, which he can then contract upon, maintaining tension all throughout the movement. And then there's another big right hand to finish things off. Here's a different angle, and you'll see the torque he creates. Twists his entire body, leading with his center, leading with his hips, creating a ton of turn, which of course increases the stretch between his torso and his arm, which then it can contract on, maintaining the tension throughout the entire movement. So big hip turn, big body turn, powering that punch, entire body behind it. And another big shot, leading with the hip rotation. Weight comes down, a little bit of a beat, and then right there, pushes off, gets his entire body into it. Behind his arm, big impact, big weight transfer. That body's behind the punch. Big knockout. Here's the fight between George Foreman and Jose Roman. George Foreman starts out with a lot of big, wild shots, as you're going to see here. So not the most precise. However, he's getting a lot of momentum, a lot of power going in his arms, and when they do land, they are catastrophic to Jose Roman. Now, after the first knockdown, he does tighten it up a bit, and you'll see him get a little bit more precise. Now, here you're going to see some more wild swinging shots by George, and then a more precise shot to end the fight. So big, wild punches here. And then a big right uppercut that ends things. Let's take a look at this a little bit slower. So you can see here, his pelvis starts moving forward as his arm is still coming back, increasing that stretch. This is still kind of a wild swing. You don't, in order to use these mechanics, you don't have to be as wild as George here. And I've shown you examples of more compact examples like Naoya Inoue and others. However, you'll see here George starts the movement with hip rotation while his arm is still coming back. And that stretches all the crossbody chains, which then create a cascade of accelerating contractions until impact. So a lot of wild shots here, a lot of wild swinging shots. However, like I mentioned, in someone like George, he gets those arms moving. They have a lot of weight behind them, a lot of mass, and they can be devastating. And he does use a bit more precise of a punch to end things. And let's take a look at the Morrison fight. Now, what is this that George is doing? Is this his idea of a feint, or is he trying to do an E-Honda into Tommy? I don't know. But I like that Tommy responds with a very nice left hook right here. I guess it's blocked somewhat, but Tommy's left hook is like all time. And you'll see he throws it from a flat foot and creates that hip rotation. So load, explode, accelerate, follow through. He loads here. His arm lags back a little bit while his hip starts accelerating forward. And then his entire body follows. And we're going to see a little bit more of this. I know this is a George Foreman video. However, I just have to point out how good Tommy's hook is and how good his mechanics are in general. He's going to throw a cross here, which is quite good as well. Almost like a overhead, but, you know, look at that hip, rotate, and everything comes behind it. But I just had to show you that E-Honda style George Foreman. I don't know what that was, but it was funny. I want to show you this exchange from Tommy. Jab to the, or feint to the head, slip, and then left hook to the body. And you'll see that he throws them just like I have shown you in my hook videos. I can't see his foot, but undoubtedly he's throwing it from a flat foot. And his hip comes forward while his arm is coming back, a little bit of arm lag to stretch those cross-body chains. The hip continues, then everything follows. Lands a big shot on the belt line. However, it's a nice hook. Here's another one of those swatting shots from George Foreman. Just not the best coordination. Reaching really far, leaving himself exposed. And he's not even really landing, he's not using good mechanics here. So you could excuse it if he straightened out that punch a little bit. But he throws it in just an awkward, wild, kind of an amateurish manner. And it's not very effective, obviously. Here's another example of a wild shot from George. He was probably getting somewhat frustrated in this fight because Tommy was doing a very good job against him. Now that, of course, lands pretty well, but look at this right hand. It's just a wild swinging shot. Tommy's back is turned to him. Naturally, he shouldn't be doing that. However, it's just another example of George wild, somewhat ineffective shots. Here's another example of a good hook from Tommy Morrison, left hook. We'll walk it back and slow it down. Now you'll see Tommy put his weight on his left leg and then use that weight to power his hips into rotation. Off of a flat foot, his arm lags back while his hips begin rotating, creating a stretch in all of his crossbody chains between his hip and his arm, including the spiral line and the front functional line. And as that hip begins to rotate, everything contracts there. After they stretch, there's a contraction. Remember the stretch shortening cycle. Weight comes down, load, explode, accelerate, impact follow through. And he's just devastating with these left hooks all day. And as you know, he's one of the best left hooks in the game. Here's another great example of a left hook from Tommy. You can see his weight is to the left. It's on his left leg after he threw sort of a feint right to the body. And same mechanics, right? He's going to be pushing off of a flat foot. His arm lags back as his hips come forward, stretching those chains. And now they all contract, starting with his hip, crossbody chains, arm, land, follow through. So yeah, he puts himself a little bit vulnerable here. However, it's a measured risk. He felt the opening was there and it was worth taking that chance. Is George in a real position to respond in this position? Not really. His weight's moving backwards. And Tommy feels it's an appropriate opening, and he takes advantage of it. And how long does that take? Each frame is a 30th of a second. So let's start right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's a third of a second. Pretty fast. Here's an example of a good left hook from George. Not wild, fairly precise. He drops his arm a little bit more than I think he should. But you'll see the hips start rotating right there. Arm lags back a bit. And then he accelerates it, lands. It's a glancing blow. Tommy's protecting himself with his glove there. But it does land somewhat. Glancing blow and then follow through. So the mechanics here, much different than his wild shots, as you can tell. And this is it's a solid punch. Good mechanics, fast enough, right? We'll count how many frames it is. Start right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. About 10, about the same as Tommy. So like a third of a second. You know, fast enough. Felt the opening was there, took advantage of it. Here I want to show you an example of some sloppiness from George where he really telegraphs his left hand and Tommy's able to take advantage of it. So look at him bring his arm all the way back and have a real swinging shot. Now Tommy takes advantage of this because it is so slow and swinging. He's able to take advantage of it because George is not in a position to defend himself after throwing that. So Tommy sees it coming, protects himself. You can see his arm is right there. Probably his elbow is close to his body, protecting himself. And then with just a quick flick of the hips, and you'll see his hips move. His arm, you can see his arm coming back while he turns his hips and his torso. Then his arm comes, lands quite well. Good counter. All right, guys, that's about it for this one. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you do like my content, please like and subscribe. And if you're interested in learning how you can maximize your own punching power using torque, using acceleration, utilizing your kinetic chains and the stretch shortening cycle, check out my product called the Power Punching Blueprint at howtopunchharder.com. The Power Punching Blueprint is an A to Z program that will retrain and rebuild your movement patterns from the ground up to utilize your kinetic chains, utilize torque and acceleration, and utilize the stretch shortening cycle to maximize your punching power. Again, you can check that out at howtopunchharder.com. That's it for now. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.